Welcome back. We're now going to continue with communicating science. Science is best communicated at multiple points throughout the process. Firstly, scientists will record their findings in detail in lab notebooks and databases as they begin their research. They present their findings regularly to their teams in lab meetings and in seminars that happen across the department. When the research has generated sufficient results, the scientists may present preliminary findings at conferences or symposia. Once the study is completed, they will write work up. Welcome back. We will now speak about communicating science. Science is best communicated at multiple points in the process. Scientists record their findings in detail in lab notebooks and databases as they begin their work. They present their findings regularly to their teams in lab meetings and in symposia. When the research has generated sufficient results, the scientists may go on to present preliminary findings at conferences or in symposia outside of their department. Once the study is completed, the work is further presented to the community in the form of posters and talks. Then the work is written up, usually in the form of an academic paper, and submitted for review to a journal. If the work is considered to be exciting, it might warrant a press release, or it might be picked up by the media and be reported by news outlets. Increasingly, social media is helping communicate results as well as findings, such as on Twitter and on Instagram. As the audience grows, the specificity and the nature of the language used to explain the process changes. And here are some examples of how scientific communication is evolving. On the left-hand side, we see an infographic that explains the results of a particular study that was in MMWR. Hospitalizations were 6 times higher and deaths 12 times higher for COVID-19 patients with reported underlying conditions. These are results of a study. On the right-hand side, we have a GIF or an animation that shows the impact of vaccinations on reducing the spread of measles in the community. So this is another way that you can represent a scientific concept in a way that people will understand it better. But there is a problem with how we explain and communicate science. The lingua franca of science has an impact on those who do not speak or use it. A study has shown that articles published in English have a higher number of citations than those published in other languages, when the effective journal, year of publication, and paper length are statistically controlled. You're also less likely to be cited and credited for your work if you do not write in English. You will be overlooked. Science articles not written in English can be ignored or overlooked because they are not understandable to people who speak English. As a consequence, critical work is often not included in the studies of others. And worse than that, surveillance and time-sensitive cases can be missed, and this is of particular importance during a time like a COVID-19 pandemic. We also recognise that billions of people around the world do not speak English. The Imagine project is working to connect people from rural and indigenous communities with scientific knowledge from labs. We recognise the need to open up science by opening up communication, and this will mean translating science into a variety of languages, including indigenous languages. But it's important to note that scientists themselves are not known for their communication skills, and this is usually due to the fact that we're not trained to be effective communicators. We have very conventional ways, standard ways of presenting our work, and we generally use scientific language, as I've mentioned earlier. And here's an example of me presenting at a conference using PowerPoint, which is standard practice for us. And on the bottom, 2 of the students from my lab, Marcus Banks is on the left and Molly Metz is on the right, and this is a poster at a conference. When we present our work, if we do not do an effective job of presenting it and communicating it, this can lead to miscommunications, where people are not understood. And this can lead to an information disorder. So the information disorder can be categorized by the nature of the severity of the information. So if we look from left to right here, we start with misinformation, follow that by disinformation, and the most serious type is malinformation. So I'm going to give you a moment just to read the text on this slide so you understand the severity of each disorder. As you can see, the nature of the misinformation can be more severe than others. During the COVID-19 pandemic, however, we are noticing that there is a parallel pandemic of misinformation. And this can be characterized by statements like masks don't work. Also by news stories like correlation between cancer and mask coverings appearing in social networks. And lastly, and most worrying of all, is mass poisonings due to the ingestion of methanol and bleach and other toxic substances. There is a ridiculous amount of false information being made available on the internet. The first is false cures. Influencers on social media have been promoting miracle mineral supplements to cure coronavirus. That is in actuality dilute bleach. It's a known toxin, and as a consequence, the FDA has warned against drinking it as it can be life-threatening. There are several conspiracies floating around on the internet. Accusations, for example, that the virus may have originated as a bioweapon from a bioweapons lab from any number of countries. This has happened on Twitter, and despite conclusive evidence from scientists that SARS-CoV-2 has a natural origin. We also see scapegoating. Some media outlets and politicians continue to refer to SARS-CoV-2 as the Chinese virus or Chinese disease, and this has led to many racial attacks on persons from particular countries and particular national origins. And lastly, misinformation about the disease itself. In the early days of the pandemic, some politicians and intelligence officials dismissed COVID-19 as just the flu, despite data from Wuhan, China showing otherwise. And those kinds of misinformation and misconceptions linger even to the present day. Here are some examples of WHO generated infographics that are trying to counter these misinformation stories that are circulating. For example, can eating garlic help with preventing infection? No. Does 5G mobile networks spread COVID-19? No. And there are a series of these infographics available on the World Health Organization's website. But where you get your news from matters. Most people do not engage in research as scientists do. For example, reading primary articles, such as peer-reviewed articles, and being thorough in their research, going back to the source, evaluating how research was performed, looking at the methods, looking at the source of funding, etc. Most people will rely on social media or news outlets, organizations for secondary sources of information. Some people, in fact, may even just Google things or use Facebook. According to the Pew Research Center, science-related Facebook posts draw millions of followers, but feature more posts with news you can use or ads than scientific discoveries. A study in the journal Science by Vasugi et al. Examined a data set of rumor cascades on Twitter from 2006 to 2017. About 126,000 rumors were spread by 3 million people. False news reached more people than the truth. The top 1% of false news cascades diffused to between 1,000 and 100,000 people, whereas the truth rarely diffused to more than 1,000 people. This means that falsehood diffused faster than the truth, and fake news spreads just like an infection. So, just as we are doing to combat the virus itself, scientists are trying new technologies to combat misinformation and the infodemic. For example, scientists are taking to TikTok to teach people about the vaccine. And in addition, many scientists are using podcasts, and this is a particular favourite of mine. This is Vincent Racaniello with This Week in Virology. You should totally subscribe and learn about all different types of viruses. But what else are scientists doing about it? Well, we're taking up other ways of communicating about our science. For example, scientists are getting trained in role play at the Alan Alda Centre at Stony Brook University. Or scientists are starting to use TED Talks to speak to the public about their science. And this is an example of Bonnie Bassler, who's a fabulous microbiologist speaking about bacteria. In addition, there are contests to dance your PhD in a way to sell your research to an audience that is unusual and distinct and different and engaging. And lastly, scientists are using social media. So most scientists now have Twitter accounts, Instagram accounts, Facebook feeds about their research. Lastly, you're seeing increasing use of infographics to explain scientific concepts in a graphical way. So for example, this one here shows, this is from the CDC, it shows how to use face cloth coverings to help slow the spread of COVID-19. Let's pause here for assignment 2.